Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the 100 Years of Movie series. This time we're talking about 1973 to 1983. I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible, but it's going to be a long video as well. So I'm just warning you ahead of time. This is where we go through each individual year and talk about my favorite movie from each specific year. So we talk about like 1973, what my favorite movie from that year is, my favorite movie from 1976. You get the point. So I want to cover some of the movies I was not able to see during this entire month, because next month we're going to be tackling 1984 to 1994. Let's talk a little bit about some of the movies that I was not able to see. So I was not able to see Dressed to Kill, Brian De Palma. I really want to see that film. Was not able to see Sorcerer. Largent, I wasn't supposed to see, wasn't able to see. Haven't seen The Outsiders yet. I'm going to get to that one soon. I wasn't able to see Gandhi, so I wasn't able to see Ben Kingsley do that. I have not been able to see Heaven's Gate. I have not seen all of Salem's Lot. I've seen a lot of it, but I don't think I've seen it all. It's a long movie. Wasn't able to see The Crazy House. It's just House. Wasn't able to see Seven Beauties. Was not able to see the sci-fi Logan's Run. Still need to see The Sting. Kanoa, still need to see. Tarkovsky's Stalker, I still want to see. Papillon. Dustin Hoffman right there. Spirit of the Beehive, and then Murder on the Orient Express, the original, with Sean Connery. Those are the things I was not able to see this entire month, but probably will in the future. So they did not make my picks, my final picks, but I do have a lot of honorable mentions for each respective year. So let's just jump straight in to 1973. So this is a fantastic year of movies that I had to pick things from. So let me just show you exactly what the honorable mentions were. The first one being Robin Hood. This is Disney's Robin Hood. This is a movie that I've probably seen more than most of the other movies that you'll see on this list. I love this movie. I love the Robin Hood and Little John jumped through the forest. You know, you get it. It's very memorable. There's fantastic morals kind of attached to Robin Hood, even though it's really kind of messy in reality. But anyways, you get the point. It's a really fun Disney movie. It's really funny. It still continues to capture my imagination and still very entertaining to this day. It's one of my favorite Disney movies for sure. So I highly recommend checking out Robin Hood. Another honorable mention is Don't Look Now. This is with Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland. This is a terrifyingly horrific film, but it's really slow-paced and really atmospheric, and I need to rewatch it again to honestly get the whole perspective of how everything, you know, kind of just goes down and breaks down between the relationship between these two. Crazy things happen in this movie, that's for sure. Another movie that was not my pick for 1973 was George Lucas's American Graffiti. I really enjoyed this film, and it is like a premonition to like what Richard Linklater would do later on, literally 1960. So you'll see Richard Linklater tackle the 70s and like Dazed and Confused, and then later on Everybody Wants Some in the 80s. But this is kind of the precursor to all that. But I really loved how it really kind of captured that, like, kind of just a night out for people who are like in high school and in college and just driving their hot rods and just driving around, just causing a lot of shit and just driving around, just yelling at each other, throwing stuff out. Like, just doing, you know, kind of stuff that kids do. So, it's a really great film. I haven't seen it in quite some time, but I really want to see American Graffiti. So, what is my pick for 1973? It is the movie called The Exorcist. This movie is terrifying. This movie is more about a crisis of faith between the priest who's actually trying to exorcise this demon. And I love how this movie is portrayed with atmosphere, its sound quality, its amazing performances, especially by the little girl Linda Blair as Reagan, who is the child who gets possessed very early on in the film. This movie is one of the scariest movies of all time. I remember hearing multiple stories from my parents talking about how when they were kids, they somehow just randomly was able to see this on television. This was put on television, like this movie, like unedited. Like, that is unheard of. You can't get away with that shit now. Obviously, no one really watches television, but you get my point. It's a really unsafe movie for kids, and I think my dad saw it when he was 7. But I watched this way later on in my life, thank goodness, because that would have gave me nightmares. But I'm kind of a little envious of that. But my pick for 1973 is the terrifying and amazing film, The Exorcist. I highly recommend checking out The Exorcist. It is a fantastic film with amazing performances that are still haunting to this day. There's a lot of things that continue, and there's a lot of movies, horror movies, that really kind of just try to copy this or get a little element of it in their own film. And so it's still iconic to this day. It's literally probably one of my favorite horror movies of all time, so I highly recommend checking out The Exorcist. That is my pick for 1973. So let's actually move on to 1974 to some other picks that are really hard to choose from as well. So let's just talk about my honorable mentions. Now, 1974 had a lot of really great films that I had to pick from, but you might know where this is going, but let's just go over some of the honorable mentions. The first one being Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know why I just paused there. I knew what that was. I had recently just saw this movie. In fact, I actually just recently got this steelbook at Best Buy. It's actually really, really cool. And I recently saw this. This is definitely one of the more terrifying films that still sticks with you to this day. Kind of like The Exorcist in a way, but in a very different kind of, the more raw aspect of it. But it was not The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. However, this movie is very dark, very, very gritty, and very raw. But it wasn't that film, and it was not Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation. We're going to talk about Francis Ford in a second, but just a movie with Gene Hackman is a fantastic, fantastic thriller where it's more or less, it's a slow burn, but it gets the point across. You should check out The Conversation if you have not. And it is not the movie, whose is my second pick actually, Chinatown, Roman Polanski with Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway. This movie is crazy, and I love this. It's kind of like a return to film noir in a way that was going away around this time period, and it's a fantastic movie. And the ending is crazy, and the things that go on in between. It's just like this mystery that they're trying to solve and trying to figure out what's going on. But it is not Chinatown. Speaking of Francis Ford Coppola, it is Godfather Part 2. This was pretty easy to pick. Godfather Part 2 is one of the greatest movies of all time. I really love it. I think it actually adds more depth to Michael's character, especially in the second part. And I actually think a lot of the more iconic scenes come from Godfather Part 2. However, I will say Godfather Part 1, you have the Don there. He's one of the more iconic characters. But this one gives you a lot more rich history of the family, having flashbacks between the two time periods that it covers, and it is kind of just showing how Michael is taken over as the Don in one half of the story, and then the other half of the story is flashbacks to the Don's childhood. And so that's something that I think is really iconic, and also it's beautiful with its landscapes. It's Italian landscapes, and it's landscapes in New York, and it's a really fantastic film. And the crazy thing is, I didn't even talk about how amazing the performances by Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in this movie are. It's just insane. There's so many great performances in this movie. So anyways, let's just move on from here, because I feel like I'm going to trip on myself. There's enough been said about Godfather Part 2. It's the pick. Alright, so 1975, actually my most difficult year to pick from. It's one of the more terrifying years for me to pick movie from, and I feel like I'm going to alienate half of my listeners when I pick the movie that I'm going to pick. So let me cover all the honorable mentions, and you're going to see some honorable mentions. You're going to see your pick in the honorable mentions, I'm sure. Alright, for honorable mentions of 1975, there's a lot of really good movies in this pick pile right here. The first one being Rocky Picture Horror Show. You can see Tim Curry right there, just being himself. This movie is really crazy. I'm not huge into musicals, and so this one was easy for me not to pick it as my favorite movie, but this is an iconic film that still resonates to today and actually has a lot of social implications for things going on in the culture. Next pick is a lot of people's favorite movie of 1975, but it's not mine, and that is Jaws, even though this is one of the more perfectly executed films ever made. Steven Spielberg's Jaws is a fantastic film that still scares people to this day. That's what's so insane about it. That's what is so insane about The Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Jaws. The movies from the 70s still resonate to today, and that's why this probably is one of the best decades for film. But anyway, Jaws. It's not my pick, I'm sorry. The movie that I would have chosen as my second pick, which is a really off-the-wall kind of pick for a lot of people, but this movie is actually Barry Lyndon, Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon. This is actually probably my second favorite Kubrick film. And so we're going to talk later about my favorite Kubrick film. But Barry Lyndon is a gorgeous film. The cinematography of this movie is just insane. It's just like watching, you know, one of the 1800s, 19th century paintings come to life. You're seeing this character of Barry Lyndon just unravel over a period of time, becoming different. He's like a social chameleon. He's becoming in different areas. He like kind of starts off middle of the road, kind of low, and then he kind of ends on a high note, and it's crazy. There's a lot of mental breakdowns. There's a lot of great film stuff in. There's a lot of great stuff in this movie, and so I highly recommend checking out Barry Lyndon. But it's not my pick, and the pick that is not as well is something that will upset a lot of people. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson, probably one of the best performances by Jack Nicholson of all time, top two for sure. But this movie is just such a fantastic film on the emotional level of just caring about other people, and this movie's amazing, and I need to see it more. I've only seen it twice in my life, and I know I need to up that myself. But it's not One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's actually a film that is really silly, and I really, really love it, and that is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. This is like my personality. If you know me in real life, you'll know that I quote things all the time. I mostly quote this movie because I know it frontwards and backwards. But this movie has so many fantastic one-liners from John Cleese, Michael Palin, Terry Jones, Terry Gilliam. All the Monty's right here, Eric Idle, and why am I Graham Chapman? God. The one that died. Okay. But anyway, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. This movie's one of the most iconic movies of all time. It's super slapstick, super silly. I love this movie. Actually, my voicemail is really reminiscent of a scene in this movie where I ask people what their name is, what their quest is, and what their favorite color is, which is, I've had this voicemail for about 8 years now, and so that just tells you how much I love Monty Python. I count to 5 sometimes, 1, 2, 5, you know, and 3, sir. I'm not going to quote the movie. You know all the quotes. Go check out Monty Python and the Holy Grail. This is my pick for 1975. This is the hardest year for me to pick a movie from, but Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I've seen it about 20 or 30 times. It's just that good, in my opinion. And it's not for everybody. I get that. It's not for everybody, but go watch this movie. It's lovely. Alright, so 1976. Let's go on from there to some honorable mentions from 1976. So 1976, another difficult year to pick movies from, but here's some honorable mentions. One being Carrie. This movie is also another terrifying movie that still resonates to today, especially for women, so I don't get it as much, thank goodness. But this movie is crazy, and a lot of things go on in this movie that you should check out yourself, because it's an experience. Another pick from 1976 that I really, really loved, that I saw for the first time, was Network. It's directed by one of my favorite directors, Sidney Lumet. I love this screenplay, and it's an insanely mad movie, and you know, you're still mad as hell. You have this this newscaster who just loses it, and the network's just like, you know what? This is drawing views. He's just going on tirades and rants about how the world is, and people want to hear it, and they're mad as hell. I love this movie. I want to see it again, but it's not my pick for 1976. My other honorable mention for 1976 is a little movie called Rocky, and this movie is about an underdog who's a boxer who is just in the slums and tries to beat Apollo Creed. You should know this movie. It's one of the greatest boxing movies of all time. A great underdog story. Sylvester Stallone does a fantastic performance as he's written this movie as well. He did not direct it. He could not have the funds for that. But I really loved Rocky. But it's not my pick for 1976. My pick from 1976 is a movie I've talked about a little bit before, but it's really iconic, and that's Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. It's Martin Scorsese. I got a little dust on there. But Martin Scorsese, I mean, you gotta love him. He directs an insanely crazy movie about a guy who is more or less on the fringes of society, and you see that breakdown in this character that Robert De Niro plays, who likes this girl and kind of goes crazy at the end, and the ending's even crazier because it's very controversial as well, and it's still controversial to this day, but it's an amazing film. It's an amazing film of understanding character drama, and understanding how the breakdown of society can get to somebody. And that's why this movie is so iconic and so great. The performances, obviously Robert De Niro's performance is just, it's perfect. Robert De Niro plays this guy who is just crazy. He's normal, and he's not normal. He just goes up and down and up and down. Taxi Driver is my pick for 1976. Alright, for 1977, first of all, the lighting is a little bit worse now because the clouds, there's overcast. I need to really get lighting in here, but we'll figure that out someday. But let's talk about 1977. This is a great year for film. Let's just talk about the honorable mentions real quick. First, I want to talk about Dario Argento's Suspiria. I just recently saw this movie for the first time. I really loved the opening of this movie and the crazy things that go on in this movie, and I'm really looking forward to Luca, who is doing the 2018 film version of this that looks very crazy and very different. But Dario Argento's Suspiria, I'm going to look into more Dario Argento films in the future so I can check out more things from that director, that Italian legend. Another honorable mention for 1977 is a movie called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This is a great Steven Spielberg movie that has an amazing steelbook that I really love, this 4K version of it. This movie is still iconic to this day as just, this space invasion kind of movie that kind of ends on a really good note, and that's what's so weird about it, and that's also what's so charming about it, but it also so strange. It's a fantastic film. But we're not talking about this sci-fi movie. We're actually going to talk about a little one known by the name of Star Wars. George Lucas's the original Star Wars. This is in the original box set for all this. But my favorite movie from 1977 is the first Star Wars film. I love this movie. The New Hope is what it got its title a little bit later on. This is a fantastic story about Luke, who's this farm boy on Tatooine, and you probably already know all the rest. Star Wars has been talked about a million times. This movie is fantastic. I remember watching it when I was younger and really falling in love with this right before Star Wars Episode 1 came out, which I was still a fan of back then, but obviously as I got older I realized how insignificantly inferior it is to the original trilogy. And so anyway, Star Wars Episode 4? Why did I just literally was thinking other things. Anyway, A New Hope is a fantastic start to an amazing franchise that is getting a little watered down now currently, but there's so much Star Wars. I could just be happy with these three movies, honestly, because these are the best. But 1977, my pick is Star Wars. George Lucas's Star Wars. Alright, so we're going to move on to 1978, to another great year of film. Here's my honorable mentions first. My honorable mentions for 1978, the first one being John Carpenter's Halloween. This is another film that is literally going to stick with you, just like Exorcist and all the other films that I just talked about, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Jaws. These movies stick with you, and that's what's so insane about these horror movies, and it's great. This is probably my second favorite John Carpenter film, and that's it's just that good. It's an amazing film, and I highly recommend you checking it out. It's got a great score as well, because John Carpenter is known for that. Another film that has Robert De Niro in it, speaking of that guy, The Deer Hunter. This movie is an insane piece on mental breakdowns. Like, this movie is just very anti-war, and you can tell that based on just all the events that transpire, but especially with Christopher Walken and Robert De Niro's character. It's an insane movie. You need to watch it. I'm not going to talk much about it because it's something it's a visceral experience. You need to watch it yourself. It's that good. But my pick for 1978 is actually kind of out of left field for a lot of people. I really loved the movie Watership Down. I love this book, Richard Adams' Watership Down. For some reason, in college, out of all places, I should have read this a little bit earlier on in my life, but as a big fan of The Hobbit and a big fan of like adventure books, especially I guess English adventure books, I really fell in love with Watership Down. There was a band that I listened to called Fall of Bafrafa, which is a metal band from England who had a concept album about Watership Down. I read into a lot of the lore of it. I'm like, what is this thing? He's like, it's all about rabbits. I'm like, okay. It's like, why is this band talking about rabbits? And then I looked more into it. I got the book. I read the book. I fell in love with the book. And I realized that there was a movie. And I know that this movie it was not a kid's movie. And that's something that I looked into a little bit further. And I know a lot of people back in the 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s as well would watch this with the impression that this movie was about just harmless bunnies, and it's just a cartoon, so clearly it's going to be for kids. Not so much. It's a very raw and very I mean, there's some parts in the movie that definitely are like kid-ish, and it's definitely that in-between phase between when you're around a teenage year to adulthood, and it's a really good transitionary film for anyone who is going through that process. I know Del Toro talks about that in this film essay in the Criterion collection on this as well. I watched all the special features. I love this movie because it tells a story of these rabbits who are going out of their way to go on an adventure to find a better home, because for one of the rabbits has this vision that they're all going to die, and the vision kind of comes true, but they get out in time. A lot of their warren is destroyed, and it's an amazing film with lots of heartache, lots of real life things that go on that are really parallel to a lot of the things that happen on in the real world for humanity, not just rabbits. So I really love Watership Down. It's my pick for 1978 because I had recently picked this up. I've seen it twice now. I really love this movie. So I highly recommend checking out Watership Down. And also reading it as well. And listening to Fall of Bafrafa if you can. Alright, we're moving on to 1979. We're getting to the end of the decade. But there's a lot of things to talk about. In fact, there's a big stack of them right here. A lot of honorable mentions. The first being Monty Python's Life of Brian. This movie's freaking hilarious, and honestly I wish this was the pick for this movie, but for this year, 1979, this movie is hilarious and I freaking love it. I just repeated myself. Let's move on from there. Brian is Jesus, you know. Another movie that I have honorable mention is the first Mad Max. I love this, the Scream Factory edition as well. I recently saw this for the first time. It's a crazy movie, and I can see how it went from this all the way to Fury Road. It's just really cool, and I'm watching all those unfold, and it's a really cool experience. Another pick that I did not choose was Roman Polanski's Tess, which I also recently saw, and I'm going to talk more about this on my weekend six-pack soon, so I'll talk about that a little bit later. Next is a movie I also recently saw for the first time, Warriors, Come Out and Play, yay! I talked about that on a weekend six-pack as well. It's a great film that I've recently, you know, just exposed myself to, so I'm really happy to have talked about it. Another movie is Werner Herzog's Nosferatu. This movie is very different from the original Nosferatu. In fact, this is a Scream Factory as well. You can flip it with a black cover or a white cover. I like the white cover. But it's a fantastic movie. Fantastic movie, if you will. Anyway, now to the hard picks. The picks that I wish that I picked for 1979 instead of the movie that I chose, but it's my favorite movie for 1979. Anyway, I digress. I'm talking too much. Alright, two more honorable mentions. The first one being Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. This is probably the greatest war film of all time. Either that or Saving Private Ryan when it comes to the realities of actual warfare and the psychological toll that it does on a lot of these soldiers. This movie's insane. You should see it. And also the Heart of Darkness documentary. Just how it was made, how this movie was made was insane too. So check this out if you have not. Another movie that was on my honorable mentions is a movie called The Jerk, Steve Martin. This movie's freaking hilarious. I've seen it multiple times. It's one of my favorite comedies of all time. But it's not my pick for 1979. My pick for 1979 is a horror film by Ridley Scott called Alien. This movie is insanely terrifying and super atmospheric, and I guess I've been picking a lot of horror movies for my pick for... I just realized that. I guess I like a lot of the original horror films. But Alien is an amazing film that still sticks with me to this day. It's very different from Aliens or Alien 3, Aliens vs. Predator, you know, all that stuff. This movie set a bar for a lot of the things going on, especially in technical design. Geiger's design of the alien was a fantastic monster creation that was a great collaboration with Ridley Scott. And I love how you have one of the greatest, most iconic female characters of all time in Ridley, the one and the only Sigourney Weaver. So this movie is just an amazing film on technical level, and it wouldn't have been made probably without like 2001: A Space Odyssey, with that claustrophobic kind of effect of the film, except it was definitely more modernized because it came out like a decade and like a year after. And so you can see that with Alien, how fantastic the creature design is, the acting in it as well, and also just the scares. Yeah, that damn cat. But Alien is my pick for 1979. So let's move on to 1980. Alright, 1980 is another year filled with some honorable mentions, and those honorable mentions involve a Kurosawa film that I actually just saw last night for the first time, Kagemusha. I really loved how this 3-hour epic of a samurai film just depicted this old warlord who died and his double took his place, and the council who placed this double was trying to trick all of their men for morale and, you know, to fight off their enemies and make sure that they're all good and all right. Very powerful movie. I highly recommend checking out Kagemusha if you have not seen that. But it's another honorable mention is Raging Bull, another De Niro film. Fantastic Scorsese film. Definitely grittier and darker than Rocky. It's black and white, and it's a fantastic film, but it's not my pick for 1980. And neither is the amazing and hilarious Airplane. I love this movie. I love Leslie Nielsen, and no, don't call me Shirley. But the pick for 1980 is another horror movie, of course. My favorite Stanley Kubrick film, The Shining. This hotel is insane, and so is Jack Nicholson. This movie is just a crazy, crazy time. I love how in Colorado, this abandoned hotel that he's taken there to write, he's taken there to really take care of the hotel with his family. He's got a little son, and he's got his wife there as well. And crazy things unfold. You don't really know if his mind's unraveling or your mind's unraveling, but things are just going. Danny, his little son, is seeing things, so is Jack, and so is Shelley Duvall's character. It's just, they're all going insane. And the movie is an insane kind of departure from the book itself, from what I've heard, but I don't care. This movie's a fantastic performance, especially, I think this is the best Jack Nicholson performance, because he just is unhinged in this movie. And the ending is insane, and I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but The Shining is one of those movies that is iconic, and I actually remember the first time that I was exposed to this movie. I remember, I've heard a lot about it, but I didn't really know much about it. So I saw in a marketing class, of all places, our teacher put the original trailer for The Shining up, and one of the original teaser trailers, and it was literally just the scene where it closes into this elevator, and the elevator opens up, and then just a torrent of blood comes out and just fills the entire room. And obviously this is a really iconic scene, and it just said The Shining, and then, like, you know, gave all the dates. Like, this movie was, like, that trailer was subtle enough and perfect, in my opinion, because it didn't give anything away about the movie. And honestly, it's really hard to describe The Shining because there's a lot of crazy shit that goes on in it. And that's one of them. And that's one of the more iconic things that happened, was the elevator with blood. Simpsons and the Treehouse of Horror does a fantastic job of doing that as well. It's hard to describe this movie because there's a lot of good things about it and there's a lot of crazy things about it, but that's what I love about it, is that there's a mystery to it as well, and it's not really explained to you as very well. So this is my pick for 1980. So let's go on to 1981. to a much simpler times for me to pick a movie from. Alright, 1981 has a lot of movies that are honorable mentions, so I'm going to try to get through this as quick as possible. The first one being the original Sam Raimi's Evil Dead. This movie is not meant to be hilarious, because the original one's kind of more serious than the other two. But this movie is fantastic. I highly recommend checking this movie out. It's terrifying, but also funny as well because of how it's executed. Another movie that I recently saw is the second Mad Max. It is The Road Warrior. This is a much better sequel than the original movie. It's a crazy adventure, and this is the movie that I can see where it really transitions to Fury Road. Another movie that I really loved, but is an honorable mention, is Blowout. This is a Brian De Palma movie with John Travolta. This is actually one of my favorite John Travolta performances I've ever seen. It's a crazy noir of this guy who just records an accident, the audio of an accident, and just uncovers something even more sinister about it. But it's a really great film, Blowout. Another movie that I have as an honorable mention is a film called American Werewolf in London. This is a really great werewolf film. It's one of the best ones of, just of the generation that it came out in. And it's still iconic and still probably the best werewolf movie. Either that or The Wolfman. But there's a lot of movies that tried to replicate this, but this movie kind of just ends in a very crazy way, and I love it. I don't know. I love this movie. Alright, here's where I get in trouble. The movie that I did not choose, but is my honorable mention, is the first Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. I love this movie. I love Harrison Ford, and honestly, I've been wanting to be a doctor just to be called Dr. Jones. By Short Round, but that's in the second one. But Raiders of the Lost Ark is fantastic. You get to fight some Nazis. You get you see this archaeologist go on this crazy adventures with his whip and his hat, and it's an amazing Harrison Ford pick. But it's not my pick for 1981. My pick for 1981 is a film called My Dinner with Andre. This is out of left field, I know. But I really love films that are set in one location, talking about multiple things, having a really compelling conversation and dialogue between two people that more or less are interested in each other in their old friends, but they're catching up with each other. One of them played by Wallace Shawn, and the other one played by Andre Gregory, hence Andre. This movie is really compelling in the sense that it goes all over the place, from talking about spiritual journeys from Andre, and then Wallace just kind of looking at him going like, what are you talking about? Like, this is like your madness. Except he lets Andre go on and talk about the adventures that he's going on. Talks about all things love, talks about death, talks about money, talks about living, talks about most of the things that most people are thinking off the top of their head, but they don't really converse with other people about. And that's what I found this movie so compelling, and why this movie drew me in. This is one of the few movies that I've only seen once, because I just recently saw this for this entire 1980, this entire 100 Years of Movie series. But I really loved how well the dialogue was, and how compelled I was to the story and the screen the entire time. And that's why I want to see this again, and I actually want to watch this over and over and over again. And that's why I think it easily beat all the other ones for 1981 for myself. I really cannot wait to watch this movie again, and I can't wait to show this movie to other people. So I highly recommend checking out My Dinner with Andre. If you like things like 12 Angry Men, or Carnage, or any movie that's kind of just set in one location, or like a little bit maybe shorter locations like the Before trilogy, Richard Linklater, this is a movie for you. If you're just interested in dialogue and compelling characters, this is the movie for you. So let's move on to 1982, some more honorable mentions. Alright, I got a pile of them right here. The first one being Dustin Hoffman and Tootsie. I love this movie, and it's really charming, and it's just all about love and kind of just premonition to like Miss Doubtfire in a way, but in a very different way. But it's a fantastic movie. Dustin Hoffman plays Tootsie very, very well. Another honorable mention is a movie, Tobe Hooper's, Steven Spielberg's production of Poltergeist. This movie is horrific, and the original is way better than the sequel. Don't ever watch the sequel. The first one is much better. I guess the remake or whatever. Anyway, another movie that is on honorable mentions is Fast Time at Ridgemont High. This movie is just Sean Penn. Another movie that is honorable mention is E.T., Steven Spielberg's E.T. This movie is fantastic, and just it's a classic. You know, it's a movie that I'm sure that everyone on this channel knows about. This movie is fantastic. And a great story about Reese's Pieces and an alien. So this is the divide where I had to really pick my 1982 pick, and I didn't know what to do, but it is not Blade Runner. I really love Harrison Ford in Blade Runner and Ridley Scott's vision here, and I've seen 3 of the 5 versions in this, I think. I've seen the original, like, theatrical cut, the international cut, and I saw the final cut as well. This movie is intelligent sci-fi, and it's definitely more on the accessible intelligent sci-fi, but it's really compelling, and it's a great story. It's a great draw. It's a flashback. It's like a neo-noir. It's one of those newer films that really just captivates what humanity's all about, and the ending is just so iconic and so amazing. And I love Blade Runner 2049, one of my favorite movies from last year. But it is not Blade Runner. My favorite movie from 1982 is a horror movie called The Thing. It's actually my favorite horror movie of all time. I have the poster right behind there. You can't see it. But John Carpenter's The Thing. This is my favorite John Carpenter film. Kurt Russell plays this iconic character. They're just trying to figure out up in the Arctic what the hell is going on with their crew. This thing is taking over and imitating them one by one, and it's a perfect combination of all the things horror that I love. Atmosphere, acting, suspense, body gore, or I guess, like, you know, body horror, I guess. I'm not big on body horror, but it's there, you know. You got all these things just combined together to make it very interesting, and it's still, to this day, even though I've seen it multiple times and I know who's who and stuff, it's still compelling, and the practical effects in this movie are just off the charts, fantastic. It puts a lot of the stuff, you know, in modern age with their CGI to shame, and honestly, that's kind of sad, but The Thing is one of my favorite movies of all time. I really love this. Scream Factory edition is the collector's edition. But it's just such a great film, and that's why I've talked about it a million times before. I'm fairly certain I've even made a video on it. Anyway, this is The Thing. This is my pick for 1982. So let's move on to 1983, the last year of this entire video. It's going to be a long video, I know, I'm sorry. But let's go through the honorable mentions real quick. I'll just do this super fast. Christmas Story is an honorable mention. Monty Python and the Meaning of Life is a honorable mention. We got Cujo as an honorable mention. We got Tom Cruise in Risky Business. We got Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy in Trading Places. And we also have Al Pacino in Scarface. Yeah, it's not my pick for 1983. My pick for 1983 is actually Chevy Chase in Vacation. It's loose in here. Someone borrowed it, I think. Bastards. They're going to Wally World. This family adventure is one of my favorite comedies. Of just this husband who, lots of crazy things go on. From the opening scene trying to get the car, it's just hilarious. It's very reminiscent of, like, The Jerk with Steve Martin. It's one of the best comedies of all time, and it spawned a shit ton of other vacation films. Some of them being better than other ones, like Christmas Vacation, and then some of them not so much. But I really loved how this movie is, and in fact I didn't want to watch this more often. I've only seen this a couple of times, a handful of times, but it's hilarious every single time I watch it, and it's one of those classics that, you know, you can't put down. So that's my pick for 1983. This has been a long-ass video. Next time, we're going to be talking about 1984 to 1994, and I'm going to try to condense that as quickly as possible as I can, but there was a lot of movies to choose from and a lot of movies to pick, and I hope you liked all my picks. I want to hear your thoughts down below on what your picks were, and also what my picks are. Is there any movies that I missed from these years that I definitely have probably missed something? Give me a like, comment down below, don't forget to share this video, and also subscribe, and I'll see you next time. I'm not jonesing around.